All right. We have Joseph here from Paris. So he said he's going to be staying on mute for a little while. Joseph, if you need me to take over hosting responsibilities while you're traveling, just let me know. I don't want you to feel under obligation while you're cruising around the world. All right. I came with a lot to talk about, but it's all kind of my personal experiences with reading Shakespeare, and especially with reading Act 4 and some experiments that I did this week. So I don't want to dominate the conversation with that, but I do have a lot of topics in that regard to talk about. So I'll start just by asking, is there any kind of plot? We've traditionally started with plot reviews of just what happened. Is there anything here that anyone feels like they want to ask questions about, or they felt unsure of, or they want to review about the plot circumstances before we go into other topics?
Yes, Luke.
Who's the army? Who's making up the army that's going to fight at the end? The Goneril, Albany. Who's there? Who's making up that army?
I think it's the combined forces of Albany and Cornwall. Of course, Cornwall is now dead, and Edmund has taken over leadership of that. But they're still, and I think Goneril is Albany's hesitant to get into it in some ways, but Goneril is aggressive, and France is an enemy. So,
I mean, Goneril essentially says she's going to make herself the man of the family, right? And I could find that line, but okay. Yeah. So,
we also saw that Cordelia says that the reason the French army is there is because she lobbied for it because of what had happened to Lear. So it's at least for her perspective, it's a friendly invasion.
And we had asked that question last time, why France was there. So we got a very explicit answer to it. One question I thought earlier there were allusions to a conflict between Cornwall and Albany, but I'm not clear what the conflict between them is. Should I be clearer on that?
I don't think so. I mean, it comes up several times that there's strife between them, or it's brewing. But nothing much comes of it in the plot.
Strife between the sisters comes up.
Yeah, so the sisters are going at each other.
Yeah,
but, that we just didn't see anything really materialize between Albany and Cornwall, although those were the rumors. Partly that might be due to the fact that France has come in, and so they have a common enemy now, and it does sound like they expect that if France is dealt with, then you'll have the problem between the two dukes, but it doesn't really enter in except as a rumor.
Okay.
It's strange.
Because there's the conflict with France, and I didn't know if that was related somehow, and I kept waiting for an explanation of what the nature of the conflict between them was, but I didn't. Okay, good.
Can I just say on that point, I think that it also sets up the differences between them, like personality wise, because the sisters are so aligned in so many ways, and then the two men have very different reactions. So I think it kind of sets up, they're not the same, they're not on the same page. Like there's going to be a difference in their reactions here.
It's also something that it's the sort of thing that Lear should have foreseen, that if he's going to divide the kingdom among different with different leaders, they're naturally going to come to blows. It happens whenever there's that kind of division of the kingdom, rather than having it be maintain political unity. So that's another thing that Shakespeare might be doing with it.
Yeah. Okay. I just have to, since you said the sisters are aligned, which I agree with, but I mean, they have a major source of conflict between them in the form of Edmund now, but also they're aligned in the sense of their utter disloyalty to anyone, including each other. So I brought up last week the kind of running theme of declarations of love versus demonstrations of love. And I felt like that was even more pronounced in this act, where you see people taking heroic actions in the name of love who feel not at all compelled. I mean, not only don't feel compelled to express it in words, but are often prevented somehow from expressing it in words because they're in disguise, or they've been banished, or so I found that really fascinating. Okay, well, the topic that I wanted to bring up, and then maybe this will lead into discussion of some of the particulars of the act, is what we talked about last time about how to read Shakespeare. So I just wanted, I implemented some of the suggestions, and I wanted to share my experience and hear if anybody else had anything to share about it. So I read Act 4 first, just with referring to the notes in the Folger edition. I kind of puzzled through it the way I usually do, and then read it back through a second time and had an easier time the second time. And then I decided to go and watch a movie version from the beginning through Act 4. So I selected the Anthony Hopkins version, which is on Prime Video. And that was one of Raja's suggestions, who can't be here today. Unfortunately, he has a family event to attend. But so I watched it, and the first thing that struck me is how utterly effortless it was to follow absolutely everything that was happening. The language is true to the original text, but I've done the work. And with what you said, what I think, Andrew, what you said, or somebody said last week about your mind having to conjure all the blocking and the facial expressions and the who they're talking to and all this stuff. I hadn't realized how much of a labor and effort that is, and how it takes away from, or just adds to the burden of trying to decipher it. So it was a really fulfilling experience to just watch it and feel, almost forget that the language was unfamiliar. I'd already deciphered what it meant, and so I could just take in the experience of watching it. So Joseph, I know you haven't done that yet, but that's what you can expect as an experience. The second thing I wanted to say is that what you warned of about not watching the film first, because it can feel, because it feels so easy, it can feel tempting to say, well, I should just do that from the start. But I was very conscious watching this version that it did not accord with my interpretation in many ways. And one of the things I'm really eager to do, I don't know if anyone's seen that version, but it doesn't matter, even if you haven't. I can just raise what I saw them as doing and see if it accords with your perspectives. But I felt a sense of satisfaction of having also not only reached the point that I could sit and enjoy it without effort, but having reached the point of snobbery. I could judge what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that's a real accomplishment. So
I'm curious, sorry, what was one of the places where you disagreed with the interpretation, or was at least it wasn't yours?
I am excited to share that because I'm very eager. Well, there were actually places that it, let's see, there was something that Cecilia, I think it was Cecilia, you can tell me if I'm right, said last week that when I watched this version, I was like, oh, I get what she was saying. So there were some places where it kind of reinforced an idea or corrected an idea in my mind. And then there are other places where I thought, this is just not at all what I had in mind. So interestingly, the guy who plays Edgar is the same actor, Andrew, in the To Be or Not to Be speech clip, which I sent to you, and I didn't send to anybody else. He's I guess a famous young Shakespearean actor who's very well known. He also played Moriarty in the
oh yes, I forgot about that.
Yeah, so he's got some famous roles that he's known for. But anyway, Edmund comes to him early on and tells him warns him that, what have you done to alienate our father? And it's immediate terror in him, like shrinking, paranoid, desperate terror. And then he runs off into the woods, and he's kind of, he's frantic and sort of has the mannerisms of insanity almost, as he's trying to protect himself or trying to cope with this situation where he's suddenly been alienated by his father. Now, I don't know whether I conjured an image of him that's just completely inconsistent with the text because of my unfamiliarity, or if that's wrong, because that felt totally wrong to me. I thought of Edgar as a much more sober-minded, self-possessed, competent sort of person who, yes, was put in a position of desperation, and I could see emphasizing how terrible that is for him. But I guess there was too much bleed over from the character he was playing, the poor Tom character, and the man that I imagined him to be. So I'm very curious to hear how other people think of Edgar.
Yeah, so it sounds like what they've done, which I've also seen done with Hamlet, is, and it's more of a living question with Hamlet, I think, than with
Edgar.
With Edgar, is both of them are pretending to be insane.
Mm.
Are they really? Like, are they actually on the brink of it? Are they hiding it? But you can make that choice with Hamlet, I think, to say that this isn't just him being, it's not simply him putting on a character. He actually is struggling to hold on to his sanity. And I think that that would be a question about Edgar. Do you feel like or think that Edgar is struggling with his sanity himself and trying to hold himself together? Or is he just doing an excellent job of being a madman?
And I just want to add one thing, though, which is that I could more easily accept that becoming a question as time goes on, after he's been living in a hovel for a while. But they make it seem like he's crazy, not crazy, but a little bit helpless and frantic and frazzled and distraught immediately, instead of just strategic about how he's going to handle this situation. So sorry, Cecilia, you were going to say
No,
something.
I was going to say, I think if anything, like you were saying, as time goes on, you'd expect him to descend more and more into the madness, whereas at the beginning of the reading for today in Act 4, it seemed like there was, all of a sudden, he seemed, at least to me, totally sane. Like, he's speaking in verse, which is one thing that I don't think he was doing before. He was just saying a bunch of, hodgepodge of random, like, poor Tom's a cold, fee, fi, fo, fum. I don't even remember what he was saying, but you could, like we were saying last time, it was super unintelligible, but this time, he's saying all these really deep things that I hadn't even noticed before. Like, the first line he says in Act 4, just in Scene 1 when he comes in, he says, "Yet better thus, and known to be contemned, than still contemned and flattered. To be worse, the lowest and most ejected thing of fortune, stands still in esperance, lives not in fear. The lamentable changes from the best, the worst returns to laughter." Now, I'm not sure exactly what all that means, but it seems like he is mirroring something that you can see with Lear too, where even if you kind of feel like you've hit rock bottom, it seems like at least you know the truth. At least people aren't lying to you and flattering to you and then gonna stab you in the back. Like, if they've already stabbed you in the back, then the only direction is up, kind of thing. And it seems like, I don't know, maybe like Mr. Seeley, you were saying with Hamlet. I mean, Hamlet says all kinds of stuff that sounds, very insightful when it seems like maybe he's still mad. So maybe Edgar's just a really lucid mad person, but it seems as though, to me, I think that he seems more like he's faking it. It's clearer to me that he seems like he's faking it than Hamlet, and maybe people wouldn't agree with that, but especially when he's talking to Gloucester, and Gloucester is doesn't know who he is, right? So Edgar's like, "Oh, that's my father," and he's blinded and he's horrified and everything. He's snapping in and out of saying poor Tom's a cold and still acting crazy, but then aside to the audience, he's saying all these things that sound very different. And so I don't know, I think if he was mad, there would be more of a blurred line there, but to me it seemed very distinct between here's my fakely mad lines to my dad, and here's the real insightful stuff I'm saying to the audience.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. And here, another example on page 173 in my version, it's line 30 in the first scene. He says, aside, and worse I may be yet. The worst is not, so long as we can say this is the worst. I mean, I underlined that for the inside of that line, independent of his character. It's just a great line. So this is a great mind, a clear mind that's making an observation like that. But there's something even more with the version I saw, that it's not just this question of where is the line between his pretended insanity, but also how strong there are several characters in this play that I perceive as very morally strong, and he is one of them. So undermining, to me, they undermined that strength by making him afraid when he's banished, rather than distraught that he's banished, and distraught mostly because of things like not being able to protect and support his father. So that it seemed to undermine the nobility of the character that I saw as having nobility. Anyone else have thoughts about that? Yeah, Luke.
So I read Act 3 and Act 4 this morning, so it's a little fresher in my mind, I think. But I'm remembering in Act 3, I was surprised to see him act crazily, fee fi fo fum and all that. But there was one thing that he was saying that caught my attention, is he was condemning himself for all these vices, and that seemed odd. And as I was reading it, I was thinking to myself, not that he was pretending at that point, but that he had almost, because of banishment, because he'd been isolated, had started to feel like he was actually a rotten person. And then there's something else that caught my attention later on, where he has a moment of empathy with King Lear, and I think this is one of the asides he has, where he says, "Oh, seeing the suffering that he's going through is making me feel a little bit better." So that gave me the sense that this was genuine suffering and madness that he was experiencing, but now, oh, I'm getting better. I'm getting better. And so that in the final stages, when he's pretending to Gloucester and he's pretending, he's pretending to Gloucester, that felt like, okay, there's an arc there that he's gone through, and now he's handled the Tom in him, and he is now making use of it to do good again.
But that he does in that scene, there are several lines where he says, in this act, he says several times, "Oh boy, I feel I'm going to lose my ability to keep up this role because I'm feeling so much emotion. So I need to be careful because the thing I'm experiencing is going to make me slip." So it's so clear. He's so explicit about that is a role. And in the situations where we saw him act the most mad, he was in the presence of his father or Lear, or somebody who's going to be able to identify him. So yeah, I still feel like in that scene, it was a very deliberate act where he's in control. But I also see that you do have to have him suffering. He can't be untouched by what he's going through. But I just want to preserve the kind of strength and nobility in him, even though he's going through that suffering. So it sounds like we're all mostly on the same page, I think.
If we look back at Act 2, Scene 3, when that's Edgar alone, he's plotting the whole thing out pretty carefully. He's recognizes the danger. I heard myself, hey, sorry, just a second. Grandkids around. Hey, I heard myself proclaimed by the happy hollow of a tree, escape the hunt. No port is free. No place at guard and most unusual vigilance does not attend my taking. Whiles I may escape, I will preserve myself, and am bethought to take the basest and most poorest shape that ever penury and contempt of man brought near to beast. So it's he's realized the danger by trying to escape. He's realized the ports are covered, and he said, "This is the only way I can preserve myself." I think also it's striking when he goes through the rest of that and says, I'm going to grind myself, put my hair in crazy knots. I'm going to, it's gonna be, they talk about him not having many clothes, barely having any clothes on. On the way they prick themselves with nails and things like that. So he's really made himself look like a horror.
Okay.
So, Andrew, are you saying that the suggestion there is that, or is that the suggestion that he is in total control and we should be looking at everything he does as coming from a sane man rather than somebody who is experiencing
I
madness?
kind of like the way you suggested it. It's what, at least what a sane man would have happened to him, maybe in this kind of outcast situation where he's had to live like this for some time and doesn't see any hope of getting out of it. That I think is a possibility, but not that he ever would say be losing his own mind in it or becoming paranoid to the extent where he can't control himself, I think was what Lisa
Or
said she
even
found that.
before he's assumed the role or described the role, because it's really from the very first scene, he's just like wild and frantic, not crazy, but just not self-possessed. I see him as much more self-possessed than they present him. Okay, well, a second topic that came up in the version I saw, I think, Cecilia, this is the one that you helped me to see, and it's interesting because we've been reading one act at a time slowly. You can lose the integration of the different scenes with different characters. And I think seeing them back to back also helps understand the character better after you've done that work. So seeing Edmund's scenes, his little kind of asides closer together, it really did seem to me like he's characterized by envy. And that envy drove him to be to the kind of evil that he has, because he's always talking about being a bastard. I mean, he repeatedly makes a big deal of the way he's been treated because of his status in society, and that he's going to get his own because of that. So I think I didn't sufficiently, I don't know, I saw him more as almost inherently evil without purpose. And it's not that it has purpose, but it does seem to have a more direct prompt than that.
If you go on to read Othello, and I want to hear what other people think about that. If you go on to read Othello, then you're going to see in Iago, right? There's somebody who claims to be envious, but that really doesn't seem to be it at all. It seems like that's much more of, to me, more of a, he's evil for the sake of evil, trying as much as he can to be that way. Whereas Edmund seems more humanly understandable. If nasty piece of work, but more humanly understandable.
Don't you mean when you go on to lead us in our next discussion of Othello?
Okay, I don't know, yeah.
Othello is the one play that you can refer to, and I actually know, so I do understand that reference. Okay, so yeah,
I think,
go ahead, Nick.
just on what you were talking about for Edmund, actually, now that you're saying it, Lisa, I don't even remember him saying too much at all. Oh, woe is me, I'm a bastard, and therefore my status, and therefore bad things happen to me. I don't really remember that. Is that really a recurring thing in the text? Jeez,
Yeah,
I remember that. Yeah, like in multiple scenes, not just
scene 2, Act 1, Scene 2. Why bastard? Wherefore base? When my dimensions are as well compact, my mind. Let's see. Remember the one we had a long conversation about legitimate, but he's focused on the fact of his being a bastard and his brother being legitimate, and saying, well, legitimate, I'm going to get from you what I'm going to get what I deserve. I don't remember where the others are, but at least in the film version, they did have several speeches. I guess that's
creative liberty, in my opinion. I don't know, like I just don't remember this multiple scenes self-pity.
I have to allow the possibility that they took one scene and broke it up across several for cinematic purposes. I mean, it could be because I didn't have the play sitting by my side to compare against, so I might be mistaken. Interestingly, I thought that the movie version portrayed Regan and Goneril as far too sympathetic, which I thought was hilarious because of what I railed about before. But they made Lear much more, and this might be right. I really want to hear what other people say, but they made my reading of Regan and Goneril was that from scene one, when they start making their vacuous speeches and declarations of love, that their motives are false. They don't feel anything real. They're insincere. They're just after wealth. So that's the feeling I had about them from the start, and everything was through that lens. So when, Lear's men are a little rowdy, but I didn't feel like, oh, that's a tremendous burden on them that his men are rowdy. But in the movie, they make it seem like it's a pretty big deal that they have to endure that. And that he's very aggressive and abrasive and loud and gets in their face. And even for Mr. Seeley, I don't know if you had this in your directing, but several times he grabs somebody by the head and kisses them on the lips. Like he does that to Goneril and to Gloucester, maybe, or I don't remember, but he's very physically overpowering, and they're afraid of him. They really look afraid of him. I didn't read that in the play, but is that in the play from what other people see?
I think that, Heather, you were going to say something?
Well, I wonder how much is colored by the fact that we read the Charles Lamb version first, because he tells us if I remember correctly, in that summary, he tells us Regan and Goneril were, he tells us their attitude and that it's that. So I wonder if for myself, as you're saying that, I wonder how much is I'm reading that interpretation.
I don't think I could see that how that might, but for myself, I don't think that's it. I think it's that Cordelia seemed so noble and so genuine, and they seemed so false from the start that it didn't give me any reason to believe them.
And they almost have to be in order for the whole conflict to work. Like if Regan and Goneril are not the villains in this, then what is this play? It's just a bunch of terrible things happening. Well,
that brings up my final question, but I'll hold that one. But so how do other people see Lear? Do they see him as terrorizing Regan and Goneril? You do.
I see the men as being like the 100 soldiers or whatever being really bad. Again, I'm the Regan Goneril actor on scene to sympathizer. But I definitely didn't get the impression that Lear was that physically empowering man. So yeah, that to me is, I'm with you on that half.
Yeah. I would probably try to take a middle ground. Oh, Stephen, go ahead. No, it's not Stephen, Molly.
Having technical problems today. So I want to point out a historical fact that in this mythical past of England, it was normal for kings to travel with hundreds of retainers and to have to feed all those people. And they could show up at a moment's notice and you'd have to entertain them. So this idea that it's this huge burden, I think we're not aware of what's expected of the servants of the king, namely the entire country, that's what monarchy is. And so historically, that would have been a perfectly reasonable obligation for any noble to have to submit to.
And I don't know anything about the history, but it does, it does seem to be presented within the context of the play as the one thing that he's retaining, not some huge ask that he's imposing upon them, but in giving away everything to him, this is the one thing he's going to keep. And then they take away the one thing that he's going to keep. So it didn't strike me as something so unreasonable. Inconvenient and not, if they had their way and had no burdens of dealing with their father in any way, which seems to be what they desire, then it's a burden in that respect. But it seemed like it should be one they're willing to take. But sorry, Andrew, you were going to say.
So a couple of things. One is that Luke, one of the things that Lear says back in Act 1 explicitly is, I still get to be, I have the title king and I've got the retainers, and you have to treat me like the king visiting with his retainers. That's what I'm holding on to. It's not really, it's stupid to think you can have both those things, have that without having the power. But that's certainly what he's expecting, and they agree to. I think that this is a place you got to think on your own human experience. So, and you got to try to be a little more historical, but also try to find something contemporary. So I would think, and you have to piece it together with things from the play, dialogue from the play that would make sense of the way you would imagine this whole situation. So one thing is that just guys like that are not going to be I guess a high image of a courtly knight like Sir Gawain or something like that. They're going to be kind of rough. They're soldiers, and they also don't have a lot really to do anymore. They're retainers of a king who isn't going to be involved. So it's probably going to be, there's going to be roughness to it. I think that you can portray that without. Sometimes directors will decide, I want to make this really more dramatic than the play warrants, but I want the power of it and the effect I think it's going to have on the audience. So I think you can do that, but I don't know that that's justified. It's not demanded by the play. And I think more of what would be in my image would be like if you go to a bar, kind of what do we call it? A redneck bar. You're in a redneck bar with guys that are, this is a place they hang out all the time, and what kinds of things can happen there, and how a barkeep, the barmaid learns how to deal with that sort of thing. But I wouldn't think it would be terrifying. I think that would be over the top. I'd say, yeah, rough. And then also a thing that supports that to me is Lear says, my men are like the choicest parts. They're the best, the cream of the crop. Well, Lear's not always aware of himself, and I think is being defensive there, and he's not making really good judgments. So I would take that kind of as a sign that you'd want to play it as though they're rougher than that, so that you can see that Lear is not really looking at things properly, but that to make him terrifying is a directorial decision to try to make something more spectacular than the play demands. And that's, I would not go that way.
Plus, if you compare, sorry.
Yeah.
You can go ahead.
Well, so the roughness, I actually did like seeing a little bit of the roughness because it gave reality to what they're complaining about. So it's not, I could see that the question was, is a football term, is it unnecessary roughness? Is it roughness that they are not obligated to deal with?
Yeah.
So in this version, it made it seem like this was an insufferable burden to have these rough men. But part of what made it the insufferable burden is that Lear himself is this imposing figure who gets in their faces and makes they're cowering from him all the time.
Yeah,
and I didn't see them cowering in the text. That's not how
that doesn't fit to me with the devotion that Kent has to him, that Cordelia has to him, the way other people, that Gloucester has to him. That's not the way, it's certainly not his normal way of being. And it doesn't also seem to fit with senility. Sorry?
Even Albany says, how dare you treat your father, who you were talking about how we have to get to know Lear by what people say about them. And even Albany, when he stands up to Goneril, wait, Albany, when he, yeah,
Mhm.
wait,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's
He says he loved you and cared for you and was a great king, something to that effect. Okay, so that, Cecilia, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I think also, like Mr. Seeley, you said what I had been planning to say. The thing about you have to look at the sort of men that Lear surrounds himself with, and then if you compare that to the sort of men that Goneril and Regan have, and I think the only real example of that is Oswald, the one servant who is Goneril's instructing to be rude to Lear when he comes in, and I think Oswald is involved with putting Kent in the stocks as well. I don't remember exactly. But to me, and maybe this is just reading too much into Oswald's put on negligent character, it's kind of a character that he's playing to make a point that Goneril's instructed him to do. But I don't know. It's like Oswald just seemed kind of sleazy and terrible to me, and I don't know. It's like, what if Goneril and Regan have this complaint that Lear's men are so awful? You know, I don't see courtly Sir Gawain-esque figures in their, their retainers either. And so it seems as though, I don't know, to me, it felt as though that was maybe not a completely fake excuse, but to me it seemed like an excuse. They're like, oh, we'll have to put up with his men and they'll be really obnoxious and rude and loud. And I think that, Lisa, I didn't see this version actually, but I saw a preview of it and I was like, oh, Emma Thompson's playing Goneril, and I just thought that was really interesting because she doesn't usually play that kind of role, and so the impression I got just from the trailer was that they were going to have play it that way, like, the poor daughters being kind of stifled by the patriarchy, and I wonder if that, I don't know, I wonder if that's our modern egalitarian kind of spin, like we want everything to be really democratical, and we want, we don't, I don't know, well, I'm saying we, just meaning like the modern, way of thinking about it in general, really wants there not to be like, the patriarch of the family who's telling everyone what to do and calling all the shots. And I'm wondering if the directors had that.
Okay.
I'm wondering if that affected how they interpreted the play. Maybe that's totally wrong.
No, I think that's a fascinating theory, because the next thing I was going to mention is that Albany comes off the simpering, weak, useless, reprehensible one. Not how I read him. Again, in the conflict between them, he seemed like he was in the right, and he was the more nobly motivated one. But yeah, that would fit with the kind of underlying ethos of it that you're describing.
Now, it'll be interesting if you go ahead and watch Act 4 to see how they handle Albany and Goneril's confrontation, because Albany here does in this scene in Act 4 does not seem like a pushover, right? He's you're a devil, you're a fiend, he's really strongly going after Goneril. He's not afraid of her at all.
Yeah,
he's shocked, he's aghast, but that's why it just when you direct or you act, you have to say, yeah, I could make this really powerful in this way, but does it fit with the whole? That's what you always have to ask yourself: is this going to make it so I don't have to twist or cut lines later on? You want to have that kind of consistent character that can fit with it all.
Got a question.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, can I go back to the King Lear thing and ask a question about that? So how are you imagining King Lear's anger and madness throughout? Is it start off more strongly at the beginning and kind of dissipates as he's ostracized and ends up by himself, and then it's kind of sadder and he might be losing his mind, but he's not as angry? Or are you seeing the rage grow from the beginning, where at first he's more of a kindly king and maybe he got a little bit testy with Cordelia, but as he's being ostracized by his daughters, his rage towards them grows and grows and grows, and his madness is tied in with anger. So does he get more angry as the play goes on, or less angry?
I don't have a simple answer to that because he seems so at war with himself over whether to be angry or to cry. That I brought up the thing about him constantly fighting against tears. And he has outbursts of anger that seem to mask his sorrow. But I didn't see him. I don't know. I guess I don't. Anger. I don't know how to think of it. I think it's not the terms that come to mind for me. What comes to mind is impulsivity, and making judgments too quickly at the beginning, that being what leads him astray. And then kind of a descent into madness as he sees how wrong his quick judgments were. But I feel mostly like and the one other element is the element of some developing senility factoring into this, that the sisters, the Goneril and Regan, see entirely as an imposition on them and want no responsibility for or to take any of that burden on themselves. Whereas, oh God, one of the lines that absolutely killed me was when Lear at the end of this act faces Cordelia and says, "You must hate me because your sisters do, and they have no cause, but you have cause." And she looks at him and says, "No cause, no cause." She does have cause, but I think she's being earnest there too, because in her mind, no, I understand. I know who you are. I know where you are in your life. I know what you've done for me in the greater context, and I love you. So I guess that's more the framework where the way I see him, but what about other people?
Well, I'm looking back at his words in the first act where he says what he wants, what he says what his intention is by doing all this, and he says, "We shall express our darker purpose," and then he says, "It is our fast intent to shake all cares and business from our age, conferring them on younger strengths, while we unburdened crawl toward death." And it's just so far from that he's arrived at. And I'm thinking, okay, why?
Because he trusted that younger strengths were going to take on.
We're going to take on the burdens of running the kingdom. And instead they're so, I mean, Goneril, what is she even motivated by? She doesn't, maybe she wants the power, but she's using it so badly. They just seem so small-minded. Whereas he really wants someone to just take the things that he's been doing and watch them go with it, it seems like, and he just wants to watch them.
He has like these moments of introspection throughout the play. Like he has a moment of reason, and then like in the next scene or the next thing, he's back to the senility and irrationality. So now that you're saying that, Heather, maybe when he's having that rational moment of, yeah, we have this darker purpose, I need to unburden myself of the power and the stuff because, I'm hurtling toward the grave. And then when the switch happens to, so therefore I'm going to do that by which one of you love me most, that moment of the purpose being rational was undermined by the impulsivity. And I don't think that good purpose, that, thought out drive he had, I think that was more, now that I'm thinking of it, maybe that was more like just a lucky moment of reason he had rather than this long-term thought out thing. It's hard
So
to tell
maybe
because
he's
that's the
just
beginning.
really, really a drama queen, kind of, and he just needs this kind of drama to happen around him. And so that's why he can't just unburden crawl toward death. He's just not that's not his character.
I think I don't know if he's a drama king, but just impulsive. And that's like it keeps switching the reason in more introspection and then something dumb and then more introspection. I don't know how to assess that.
Well, is there a better way he could have done this? Is there a better scenario that anyone can imagine for him abdicating?
Well, I think that he should have done what he planned to do in the first place, which is just divide the kingdom into the three. Oh, I'm not sure if you're still.
Oh, well,
Go ahead.
I mean, if he had given it all to one daughter, that might have saved all this civil war brewing.
But he
Does that
couldn't have
make-
given it to Cordelia.
I'm sorry?
He couldn't have given it to, is it Cordelia? He couldn't have given it to her, but she's the youngest daughter.
Mhm. He'd
But
still
I
be in
think
the
even if he had
position
just
of-
divided it,
He's kind of stuck because she's not married, but he wants to give it all to her or, hand over the kingdom. So he has to
but what
divide
if
it.
he had just done what he said he was going to do in the first place? What if he had just drawn those lines on the map and said, this is yours, this is yours, this is yours. Let's choose who's going to marry Cordelia. And then.
So to me, that's maybe I'm overemphasizing this theme and I'm open to being corrected on it. But to me, as I experience the play now, and it really hit me thinking about that line from Cordelia, to me, that's the drama of the play, is that he's dividing up the kingdom and he makes a mistake, and it is a mistake.
Yeah.
He acts impulsively. He desperately misreads the situation. He thinks the disloyal daughters are the ones who are loyal, and disaster is going to happen from that. And the thematic element that strikes me so much is, so what do people do under those circumstances? What is loyalty when somebody who was good and who is good in many ways acts irrationally and does make a mistake? Do you then it's clear with the characters like Goneril and Regan, it's just everyone for themselves and they have no sense of loyalty. And then it seems like every admirable character is in the position of maintaining loyalty in the face of irrationality, in the face of having been treated unfairly. And they do that so heroically, all of them. So I guess he needed for the drama, as I see it, he needed to make that mistake from the start so that we could see Cordelia take a leadership position and amass an army to come in and so we could see
save her father, to come in and save her
to
father.
save her father, and then tell him, no fault. I have nothing to blame you for.
No, I think this actually, I was listening to you bring this up earlier. This is tangential bit, but I think I see what maybe she means in no cause, the way I hadn't before, which is, he says, and this is on page 221, it's Act 4, Scene 7, line 80-ish. He says, if Lear says to her, if you have poison for me, I will drink it. I know you do not love me, for your sisters have, as I do remember, done me wrong. You have some cause, they have not. No cause, no cause. What makes sense to me right now is that she's saying there's never any cause which could make me stop loving you.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Lear's? Yeah. Is Lear's mistake that he doesn't know who's really on his side and who isn't? Like, is that the thing that drives all of this?
He doesn't know what love is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, he equates love with flattery, and that leads to his fatal error in judgment there. But we're seeing with Cordelia, like, no, love can never have any cause to stop loving the one. No matter what wrong you do to me, I will love you. I will have to, protect I'll have to try to handle this in some way, but I will never stop loving you and waiting for that opportunity to come back and help you when you're in need. Sarah?
Well, and you saying that, I just realized like that thematically is what comes through across almost every set of characters, right? So you've got the misjudgment of Gloucester, the loyalty of his two sons, taking the loyal one to be disloyal. You've got the misjudgment of Goneril and Regan and Cornwall, of Edmund as being the loyal one when he's actually being disloyal to his father. So I think that comes across like in a lot of different ways, that this idea of loyalty and of misjudging others is thematically what seems most strong to me.
And I think you see that in this act. I was noticing just some positive things coming out of that, I guess. So it seems like Gloucester and Lear are both realizing in this act, with their reunions with their actual the loving child of each of them respectively, it seems as though they're kind of admitting, yes, I was wrong, and I see that I'm suffering because I did wrong. So Gloucester is with poor Tom, quote unquote, and he's saying, I don't remember what he says exactly. He says something like, poor abused Edgar, the food of thy abused father's wrath. If something, if I could see thee in my touch, I'd say I had eyes again. And so he's really wishing he could be there with Edgar so he can, apologize to him and tell him that he does actually love him, and then he realizes that Edmund was wrong. And then Lear has that really sweet moment with Cordelia where, they're kind of making up, and he's, calling himself a fond, foolish old man, and she's, saying that she still loves him. And it seems as though they both, like Gloucester and Lear at that point, it almost kind of seems like a happy ending there, because they did a bunch of wrong stuff, they suffered horribly, both of them, and now they're reunited with the person they wronged and acknowledging their wrong and being forgiven. So I just think that's a really, I don't know, it's a kind of a happy moment in the play. I mean, before all the other stuff happens in the subsequent act.
So this kind of goes back to our question about how to understand did Goneril actually suffer stuff from the knights being there? I think that I would probably play it as, yeah, she did. Not terrifying threats or anything like that, but but something that you'd say, yeah, that's something she has to suffer in this situation. But she doesn't love. She doesn't love Lear, and so she says, I'm going to have to get rid of this problem. And then Lear, she treats Lear and his men as a problem that she's going to solve in a way that's most suited to her. Whereas Cordelia, who suffers so much more from Lear, never ceases to love. And it's really neat how in Cordelia and in Edgar, you both see the abused children being the ones that take care of their fathers who are decimated.
Yeah.
And that's just a tremendous example.
I think that clarifies what I found so appalling about the interpretation, is that portraying the burden made sense to me. Make the guys rowdy, make it clear that it's very disruptive to the household to have these 100 men. But the question then is, number one, is it an endurable burden? Number two, how do you treat the burden? How do you just say, no, you can have 0 now, which is robbing him of dignity, which is the way he sees it. Taking away what's unnecessary, meaning, well, you're taking away what gives my life meaning at this point. So is it endurable? How do they deal with the problem? And then how do they treat the person, the person himself? And they're so contemptuous of everyone who gets in the way of their plots for, I don't know, for Edmund or for wealth or for power or for whatever it is they want. Anyone who's in their way is just, has no utility to them anymore. so just portraying it as too excessive a burden makes it seem like they, it doesn't, I think the emphasis needs to be on their giving up at the slightest request of some kind of taking on some burden. Sorry, Luke. Okay, you're muted.
10 years of Zoom and I still don't do that.
Yeah.
I like that phrase of endurable burden because it made me immediately think of comparing the burden that Cordelia has at the beginning versus the burden of the daughters and paralleling them. So she's kicked out of the kingdom and they just have to like host their dad for a party or like, keep him in their home for a little bit. And her reaction to that is so completely different. So I was puzzling, why would it be such a small burden? And then it leads to a big war, but it's to show they have no time and place. They don't, this shows the shallowness of the affection by how little that they are willing to put up with.
Yeah. And Andrew, you were saying before, comparing this against the reality of human experience, I have been witness to someone having to endure the burden of a father who's irrational in old age. And it would be very easy to turn in a perverse sense, to turn your back in that situation and not take responsibility. But that is not an act of love or noble character to do that.
Sarah?
Another thing
Go ahead,
to add here, just thinking about kind of building on the characterization of Goneril and Regan as taking any offense as cause for then, full rupture and full throwing off of all of their responsibilities as daughters. I think also in the text, there's several ways in which there are hints at them being conniving and scheming, like that we know that their husbands may be at odds with one another, and then the seed is planted about them going to war with one another, and then the daughters end up going after, both going after Edmund, which was so odd. But I think like those, to me, they characterize the daughters in that far before we ever get to Act 1, there's probably, they are scheming, are thinking about how can they maneuver politically to take advantage of the situation. And so all it takes is like one small thing for the whole chain of events to be set off.
Mm-hmm. And then the fact that she has to egg Oswald onto doing stuff to provoke more. So it's like she doesn't feel like she has enough with just what had happened to kick him out. So she's got to get Oswald to ratchet it up so that she has more cause. That's, I think, is a sign that it would be just wrong to make it an intolerable and terrifying burden on her.
Yeah. Can I lend support to Cecilia's point before about Gloucester and Lear kind of coming around to see their mistakes later? This one of my favorite lines. It's Act 4, Scene 1, line 19. Gloucester, let's see, the old man had just said, "You cannot see your way," and was offering to lead him. And he says, "I have no way, and therefore want no eyes. I stumbled when I saw." So when he had eyes, that's when he couldn't see at all. And now he has no way at all.
And that's really, deeply moving to think about both Gloucester and Lear having to accept the fact that they unjustly treat us. It's so much worse than that. They both made horrible decisions about one of their children, and then to realize that they were wrong and have to admit that, I did that. And think about all the curses that Lear poured down on her. And
so that is the powerful thing, is that they still have enough rationality to see their mistakes. And I just remembered one of the lines that jumped out to me is, I think it's Gloucester says, "Oh, if I could only be mad." I can't, that's not the phrase, but he says, I wish that I'd lost my senses so that I couldn't feel the pain that I'm suffering.
Well, the pain that I know what I'm suffering, but also I know what I did to Edgar.
What I did, yeah. See if I can find that line.
Says something like, "How stiff is my vile sense that I
Yes.
stand up and something something." I don't remember what he says exactly, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost like he wishes he was Lear, because then he wouldn't have to suffer as much.
Yeah.
A few thoughts on the Lear's rage, and Luke, I guess going back to your question. One thing, and this has been on my mind for a little while, is that another part of human experience, which I don't know if we're probably not going to have this anymore, but when my grandfather was in his 50s, he was old. I mean, he was aging. You know, his health was starting to break down. He'd had a kind of factory job all his life, and he was looking forward to 65 when he could retire, so that he could go fishing and hunting and all the fun stuff that he had not been able to do the way he wished he'd been able to do because he had to work. But then when he got to 65, he was old and he couldn't do it the way he wanted to, and he ended up dying, about 70 or 72 after. So it just wasn't a thing. So I think that Lear's kind of in that mentality. That's the way I would imagine him, is that he's earned retirement. And retirement is going to be able to have all the fun you wanted that you've had to deny yourself all these years because you've been the responsible one. Now you get to have the fun stuff. That's what I think Lear's mentality kind of going into this is. So he needs the 100 people to be able to have that kind of relaxed, enjoyable life that he's denied himself all those years.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like it's fair to, I don't know, I think it's fair that he wants it. I mean, it seems like that's one of those situations where he'll lose either way. Like, if he stays the king, then in a couple of years, Goneril and Regan will say, "Oh, he's so senile. Why doesn't he just, give up the throne and let somebody else rule who actually knows how to do it?" Like nowadays with, even with American politics, people always say, like, we should have a cap age on the presidency because, once you hit like 80 or something, you get, really senile or whatever. And so, I don't know. I feel like no matter what Lear had done in this situation, if he'd decided to give it up or if he hadn't, he would have gotten blame about it. Simply, I don't know.
Yeah, I think
either way, I think he would have lost.
Either he doesn't retire so he can retain control and then probably collapses eventually, like Cecilia's suggesting, or he goes to a monastery. Like, those are kind of his two options. But he doesn't want that. He wants to have the fun and not the responsibility. Oh, and then sorry. And then I think of Lear as, if I would make him probably be scary angry in that first scene, when he says, "Come not between the dragon and his wrath." That would be the terrifying moment. He could be terrifyingly angry at Cecilia. But then as he goes after that, he's it seems to me he's first blindsided by the fact that he's not being treated the way he imagined, that the girls aren't living up to their promises. That's sort of blindsiding to him. And then he realizes he's impotent, that he can't do anything. And then his rage becomes it's an impotent rage. Whereas it's a scary rage in the beginning, it's an impotent rage. And then he's realizing, I'm old. He starts to see that I've got nothing anymore. And then it becomes kind of just a desperate rage to distract himself. I don't know if that makes, I don't know what people think of that.
Yeah, that fits with the fighting tears also, is that it's kind of accepting the impotency of it. There's nothing he can do with that anger.
Yeah, it's like he'll start to make a threat, but then he realizes he has nothing to threaten. He starts saying, I'll do such things. I know not what they are, but whatever they are, they'll be the terrors of the earth. I don't remember when he says that. I think he's talking to Regan. It's like he has no authority to tell them to do anything. They have all the, I mean, and he gave them the power. So I suppose you could just say, well, sucks to be him. Like, he should have seen that coming. But I still think it's really sad.
Is it okay if I step back from this and ask a broad, higher level question? Okay, so it's interesting because one of the questions I came in with, my own thinking about it has altered dramatically over the course of this conversation, but it's still a question. I had confessed to struggling with Shakespeare. I think I've made remarkable progress over the course of these sessions, because I mean, anytime I now think about no fault, it's going to make me cry. So that's an accomplishment. So I was considering the nature of the struggle. And one thing I am very conscious of in myself in terms of my own literary tastes and experiences is that my brain is an integrating machine. I want every piece of it to fit together into one cohesive, concise whole. And everything that I teach in my curriculum, possesses that quality. You pick a line from that book, I can tell you exactly how it integrates with the theme as I understand it. Now, I don't think all literature must live up to that standard. And I think there's lots of great literature out there where that's not exactly the purpose, or historically that wasn't even the approach, or there can be all kinds of reasons. And it means that I struggle a bit to learn appreciation for the things about which that's not true. So I think that's one of my goals, is to learn to appreciate works of literature where it's not definitively tightly integrated around a theme that I could name in a sentence. So it's funny, Joseph said in passing something like, I see where, I've never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones, but I feel like I know enough about it to get the reference. But he said, I see Game of Thrones took everything from Shakespeare, or Greek mythology, or there's just all sorts of stuff out there where it's about presenting dramatic situations, or I even see it in short stories. Short stories often are just creating a mood or creating a kind of single experience, but not a theme in the same sense. So one of the things I was asking myself is, does this have a theme in the sense that my brain craves theme? And I think the answer is no, I don't think it does. But I think it has more of a theme than I recognized until our conversation today, because it's funny that I wrote down last time, like declarations of love versus demonstrations of love. And that was a step in the direction of the thing that we were talking about today. And so much of it does integrate around devotion to love, what love really looks like in the characters who are actually acting on the basis of love and those who are not. I don't know how you would state the theme. I have to step away from it to think about that. But anyway, I'm curious what people think about that. Do Shakespeare plays have, let me give an example so that we can compare against it. 12 Angry Men is a play that I teach every year to my 7th graders. I don't know, I think most people here are familiar with it, but the theme of that is that personal biases and prejudices obscure truth, and what it means to stand up to insist on a truly reasonable thinking process that's not clouded by personal biases or prejudices. And you can connect everything that happens to that theme. So is there something similar in most Shakespeare plays, or is it more complicated than that and different? Andrew, I think most people are waiting for you to answer.
Yeah. I think that it's not an easy integration.
Okay.
That it's complex. Is it statable as a theme?
But you do think that every aspect of this connects and integrates into a central purpose? Or do you think it's looser than that, that he has kind of a general, a general point that he wants to make, but that you can just create drama around that thing, and it doesn't necessarily have to all connect to that general purpose?
I think that so I don't have a ready answer for this.
Okay, no, it's a big question.
I do think it all integrates. Now, to explore sort of the conceptual way it would integrate, I think we have to talk about themes that we haven't explored much, which are on a more abstract level. So nature, we've started to, nature, convention, the gods, and man. Those are four words, or four words or related words that come up often throughout the play. So how are what are we seeing in the drama and in the voices, in the dialogue that are speaking to those things in the context of the drama of this kind of central drama? So that would be something I'd want to talk more about, and maybe starting with the question of what is man, because there are several times in Act 3 and Act 4 where we say this is man, the naked, completely undecorated person who's just subject to all the storms and everything. That's what man is in his essence. And everything else is superfluity. It's all added on by convention and artifice. Is that, I think we want to ask ourselves, is that what the action is showing us?
Well,
or
I mean,
is that a sort of false or limited view that we're supposed to build out from the rest of the drama? So that would be an important question to ask, I think, on the conceptual level.
I did note, references to fate a bunch of times in this, things being dictated by the stars, like Kent saying in Act 4, Scene 3, it is the stars above govern our conditions, else one's self-mate and make could not beget such different issues, like the difference between I think he's talking about Cordelia versus her sisters there, but I couldn't, if in order to understand the integrated purpose of the play, I have to also work in these references to fate and the nature of man and stuff, then maybe it is just too complex for my comprehension.
At least I think that's where you want to go. You want to include that in it. Are the gods justicers? So that's what Albany says, and they Cornwall. If Cornwall gets away with this, I'll never believe in the gods. That kind of thing. That Edgar tells Gloucester, and it would be great to talk more about this, the drama that Edgar tells Gloucester that you just jumped off a cliff and you fell down here and you were saved, which makes Gloucester believe the gods are protecting him. That's a really astonishing thing. What are we supposed to make of that?
So a question for you, because I learned to love literature from my professor, Leonard Peikoff. And one of the things he talked about in the first course I took from him was, this is his view of literature, but that he differentiates between theme of the particular work and the author's philosophy, their philosophy of life. And he did a course called 8 Great Plays, where his criteria were they have to have a theme, but beyond that, they have to be presenting a broader aspect, a broader philosophy of life. It has to be clear within the context of the work that they're creating, or they're creating a whole universe for you that projects a certain philosophy of life. So I've always sort of thought of those as separate, the particular theme of this work and the overall philosophy presented. And if it's a truly great author, I could see why it would need both components. But do you think of them as separate, or do you think of those as one and the same?
I think of them as one in the drama. That and it's always hard for me to tell what Shakespeare's, what would Shakespeare say if you ask him the question. But it is something that I think you want to integrate into the drama, into the action of the play. So I mean, kind of here, I guess it might just be like you're looking at different levels. Like, what are you gonna? There are many levels you can focus on in this presentation, in this story. What's a very particular thing going on, this family situation, and family and political situation is the particular thing going on. But sometimes there are bigger ideas that there are ideas, I guess, that that the particular situation reveals the significance of them. So if it's right that, say, and this is, that man, you want to distinguish man by nature from man by convention, and everything that a human being has other than his skin is convention. It's stuff that people decide upon that you could change any way you want. If that's right, well then Edmund is free to go about having nature for his goddess, and not paying attention to any kind of conventional morality. And I think that really does drive Edmund. But you see in Cordelia and Kent a much deeper sense of humanity, I think, than you get from that kind of idea. And that that love and pity love and pity and human concern that extends more broadly than to just yourself or your immediate ones. That's what really is going to make that's what humanity is in its fullness. Something like that.
That's been the dominant thing I've been drawn to, is the contrast between the sisters and Edmund versus Kent, Cordelia, and now I guess you can start to put Gloucester and maybe even Edgar into there. Is on one hand you have this narcissism and short-sightedness, and on the other hand you have some pursuit of an ideal, right? So Cordelia and Kent elevate the sense of honor and love above the king going mad versus, and everything else is just, drama to contrast those two, how they react. Now, that's being said by somebody who's just barely hanging on to the plot. So like, I take that for what it's worth, but that's what's been standing out to me as I start to I think I know what's going on. They all seem to fit around those little circles that I've been drawing. But yeah, that resonates what you were saying, Andrew. So that's, yeah.
So I guess if that would be where I'm kind of gravitating towards a central idea that you want to integrate other things around, but that
right.
Well, what love makes you do.
And is this what you're saying, is that you have to understand that broader context would inform how you interpret and present the character. If you were directing this, you'd have to understand those broader ideas in order to color and inform the particular situation.
Though I think it goes both ways. As you're directing, while you're making the particular actions impactful and unified, it also affects then how am I going to have my character read? How am I going to have my character say these lines which have philosophic significance?
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll think about it more. That's not.
Yeah.
It's another
Well, and
thing.
we
like, I
haven't
guess
even finished the play before. I've
Yeah,
asked that
but-
question before we've even finished it.
something like Oswald and this. There's so you might think of Oswald as not easily fit into everything else. But I don't know. Maybe people do see that. But I'd say that with Oswald, you're seeing this. There's this servant relationship besides the familiar relationships and the vassalage relationships. There's this servant relationship that that also has to be integrated by a proper sense of duty and love. And you see in Oswald how disastrous it is when servants won't do that.
Mhm.
So we've, yeah. Is that helpful?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Luke.
I've got a question, and I don't know if this is something to spend just a little bit of time on, or however. So I haven't read this play before, and I haven't looked at a summary, and I don't know what's going to happen in Act 5. And sometimes what I do to help me kind of anticipate and kind of see where it might be going, and then have the play answer questions, is to come up with questions about what, or the questions that I would want to have answered by the story so far. And I'm wondering,
when have you questions that
no, that's different. No, that's a personal connection. The reason I wasn't here last week was because my parents were visiting, so I've had a lot of when have you King Lear moments with my family around. So I wanted to be a good son and like serve them and miss class.
Good for you.
So, but I mean, so like there's this battle. Okay, what are the possible outcomes that could happen to this battle? There is Edmund going to like get one of these two women to be with him, and are they going to rule the kingdom? So we saw a reconciliation between King Lear and Cordelia, but does that mean that Cordelia is going to save her father's honor by defeating the evil sisters? I'm wondering what kinds of questions there are that you would want to have answered if you were reading this the first time, or if you have read it and you can guide a little bit of what questions are important for the final act.
What do you do about the universally accepted fact that in the Shakespearean drama, everyone dies, though? How do you not?
I like to pretend that it might not happen.
Okay.
And then there's certain characters that I don't know might live. Like even in Othello, there's some characters that do live,
Yeah.
or how they die is important too.
Do you wish right now that Cordelia could take Lear back to France, and that would be the end of it?
Yes.
And they lived
Don't
happily
say
ever
something
after.
like that. No. Okay, that's a great. Yeah, what do I wish would happen? Okay. Do I wish I like that formulation a lot. Do I wish she could take why does she have to go to just bring your dad back? Or does she want to save her dad's kingdom? Okay, so that's one.
What do you wish would happen to Edmund and the sisters?
They fall off a cliff.
Yes, I was exactly thinking of exactly that. Like have Edgar lead them to the cliff, like where they're blindfolded, but it's actually a cliff. That's good.
And convince them that it's not.
Yeah. Yes, let me describe for you what you're seeing. It's a beautiful little, little white clouds, and there's lots of buffets and
step
foods.
down, yeah.
Okay.
Those are, I think, great questions to have going in.
Yeah, I like those.
I think also about which characters do I imagine are going to interact with each other. For us to have catharsis, we have to have Edmund and Edgar come into contact with one another again. I feel like we have to have Regan and Goneril come into contact again, and Lear with his daughters, at least one, if not both of them. Cordelia also has to somehow interface with them. So I'm imagining those sorts of interactions and how they might go. and how we might have catharsis, even if it's not a positive thing. We would at least walk away with the conclusion to these conflicts.
Well, my question is, how much does Shakespeare think that Lear deserves to be punished? How badly is it going to end for him, and how much is he at fault for what's happening? And therefore, like, is this going to end happily for him because it was just a little mistake and now it's fixed and he realized what he did wrong? Or, you know, obviously not. So, yeah.
But it's interesting because that's a great example of the philosophic context, because the premise there is that if he dies, it's because it was his fault. It's because of his fault. But
or fate, yeah.
Right. Is that how Shakespeare conceives of it? I don't know.
Or even if he does deserve it, to what extent should we still feel bad for him? Like, is Shakespeare trying to make us feel bad for Lear or not? Like, are we supposed to be like, you know, that's what he deserved, that just deserves. I feel cathartic happiness that, well, I don't want to ruin it, but, you know, if anything bad were to happen to Lear, would he deserve it? And we'd be happy about that, or at least feel like, well, you know, that kind of, again, like, it sucks to be him, but, you know, he kind of brought it on himself. Or is it like, or even if he did bring it on himself, is there still room for pity there if somebody brings evil upon themselves? Because that's kind of what tragedy is all about, right? Like, the tragic flaw is that, or at least what Aristotle says about tragedy is like, you don't have a really good man suffering for nothing he's done, because he says that's just horrible. It's not cathartic, it's just horrific. And you also don't have an extremely bad man just, you know, falling off a cliff, like we were saying with Goneril Regan, because that doesn't make us feel pity either. We just feel like, yeah, you know, and then we're all really happy. And then, but it seems like a tragic hero, according to Aristotle, is a sort of middling person where they do make mistakes, and their mistakes either directly or indirectly cause their downfall, but they still hopefully are a good enough person that we are able to feel pity for them, and we're not just feeling, you know, like that's justice.
And the suffering is not necessarily in proportion to their mistake. That's what seems, I mean, is there any truth to Gloucester's line that as flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport? I mean, he said that in despair, but is it true? I don't know.
Is that what it seems like? I think that's a question you want to have at the end is does any of this make sense, or does it seem to show a senseless world?
Yeah.
On that point, I want to raise a question that I don't want to answer this week, but I want to answer after the end of the play. So I lurk in a bunch of teacher groups on Facebook. I find it fascinating to see what teachers are reading with their students and how they talk about what students like and dislike. So recently there was this discussion on an AP literature group on Facebook about a teacher was asking, you know, I'm so tired of teaching the same old Shakespeare plays. I want something different just to like change it up. What do you think? And a few people recommended Lear. And it seemed like the general consensus in those comments was like, you should read Lear because it's such a soap opera. The students love soap opera. So I wanted to plant the question of, is this a soap opera? And if not, what is the difference? Like, it is the drama, basically comes back to Lisa's integration question. Does the drama, like, and yes, there is drama, right? Like some of it, maybe even a little gratuitous. Does it integrate around a bigger, more important theme? Or is it just there for the pleasure of, wow, I can't believe that just happened. That guy got his eyes poked out. You know, we can throw a bunch of crazy actions into a sequence and create something that's compelling. But is there more to it than that?
Is it Game of Thrones?
Yeah.
I just want to share something my university professor said, my English teacher. We were reading The Tempest, and in her introduction to it, she said, look, guys, Shakespeare didn't fall down the stairs and then the play just spew out. Every line, every word is there for a reason, a purpose. It's meant to be there. Every word you see, every whatever, it's there. And so in reading King Lear, I'm inclined to believe with her. I guess I'm accidentally answering Sarah's question. but
Yeah.
I don't think like the madness monologues are just hodgepodge stuff that could be easily interchanged with other hodgepodge stuff. I think it integrates to something. So yeah, that's my 2 cents, and I think there is a central idea.
Yeah, so let me just add a couple things. One is, I've always found it with a Shakespeare play that the more I know it and the more I ask questions of it, the deeper the answers get.
Mhm.
So that yes, I think it's all integrated. I do think Nicholas is right that everything is crafted so that it all holds together, but it's
not easy.
layers upon layers that you grow into. So
Mhm.
the second thing I want to bring up, this is Gloucester talking. This is Act 4, Scene 6 at line 45. O you mighty gods, this world I do renounce, and in your sights shake patiently my great affliction off. If I could bear it longer, or not fall to quarrel with your great opposeless wills, my snuffed and loathed part of nature should burn itself out. So this is when he's about to kill himself, he thinks. And he treats the gods as having just the opposeless wills. I think that what's contrast with that and what he comes to after Edgar's treatment is, I have to suffer patiently what's happened to me.
Mhm.
I have to submit myself to the plans of the gods and the decisions of the gods. They're not opposeless wills. There's something that good comes from it. And the patience with suffering and difficulty and your own collapses is also another key theme in here, I think.
Oh my gosh. Okay, it's starting. It's the layers are building.
Yeah.
That was very helpful, and it's fascinating because I wanted to say one last thing before we go, and that is that my final disappointment with the movie version is that I found Cordelia very ordinary, and the Cordelia in my mind in that play is anything but ordinary. So in the opening scene, she just sort of sits there and almost rolls her eyes at her sisters. The Cordelia I know would not be rolling her eyes. She would be morally outraged. And a few of the lines that moved me in this section, Act 4, Scene 3, it's page 185 to 187 in this version. So the gentleman is describing to Kent her reaction when he brought the letter, and he says, and now and then an ample tear trilled down her delicate cheek. It seemed she was a queen over her passion, who, most rebel-like, fought to be king o'er her. So her passion fought to be king, but she, queen-like, kept control. It says she was not moved to a rage. Patience and sorrow. Patience was one of the virtues that it described in her. Patience and sorrow strove who should express her goodliest. You have seen sunshine and rain at once. Her smiles and tears were like a better way. Those happy smilets that played on her ripe lip seemed not to know what guests were in her eyes, which parted thence as pearls from diamonds dropped. And then will be one of my favorite lines from the entirety of the play. In brief, sorrow would be a rarity most beloved if all could so become it. But just he's praising her for the patience. She's suffering, but she's maintaining patience. It's not turning into rage, and then she does what's right.
Yeah. Okay, we should probably end at that, huh?
Yes.
All right. Well, I think if you haven't read it before, you're going to have a good experience reading it. Not everything will be satisfying, but it's going to be very, very good. So,
okay.
All right. Thank you all.
Oh, wait. We have to delay next week, right? Mr. Seeley
Sorry,
has
it's going to be. I have to. Yeah, I'm going to be at a graduation ceremony next Saturday, so we'll have to put it off 1 week.
So it'll be the following week, and I'll send out a reminder. Okay. Thank you.
All right. God bless.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.